GOP supermajority. Anyone can join and write through Postcards to Voters, who is coordinating on these races directly with the WisDems, and we encourage everyone to write with us. Information on how to get started will be included in our link tree, which we'll put in the chat. Several of our groups also run giving circles through the States Project, because we believe reshaping government at the state legislative level is how we protect our democracy and where we can have the greatest impact on changing people's lives for the better. We are in our 6th year, and collectively, we have raised nearly $2 million and have supported the following battleground states: Arizona, Iowa, Michigan, North Carolina, Nevada, Pennsylvania, Texas, and Virginia. We are super proud that our long-term commitment had a payoff in 2022 with wins in Michigan, where we now have a state trifecta, and the majority is passing bills like universal background checks and repealing an archaic abortion ban. We also flipped the Pennsylvania House, and now Pennsylvania has the first Black woman speaker to lead the House. We held the Democratic majority in Nevada and held our ground in Arizona. If anyone here tonight is interested in starting their own giving circle, please reach out and we can help you get started. We hope you will learn more about our groups. We will put a link tree into the chat throughout the evening, which will direct you to all of our links, and you can sign up for our newsletters, join our giving circles, write postcards, and join our amazing community of activists. Thank you again for being here. With that, I will turn it over to Ellen Bender.
Thank you for that lovely welcome, Kim. I'm Ellen Bender, one of the co-founders of Markers for Democracy. I'm delighted to see so many people who care about saving democracy on Zoom tonight. Thanks to the amplification by 3 of our favorite Substack authors, Jessica Craven, Robert Hubble, and Simon Rosenberg. The idea for tonight's conversation came from my Markers for Democracy co-founder, Susan Wagner, who heard Simon Rosenberg talk about a meeting he had with Bill Kristol and decided that we should host a conversation between the two of them on the subject of the pro-democracy coalition between Democrats and never-Trump Republicans that has emerged since 2016. Susan is also the force behind the 2 Bills ads featuring one of tonight's guests, Bill Kristol, and the other Bill, actor and comedian Billy Kristol, which first ran in the 2020 presidential campaign and was revised for this year's midterms. If you haven't seen the ads, Google them, and you'll see that Billy Kristol is not the only Bill Kristol with comedic chops. Bill Kristol is director of Defending Democracy Together and editor-at-large of The Bulwark, which many of us, including lifelong Democrats like me, read as part of our daily newsletter diet. Bill was a founder of the Weekly Standard and served as Chief of Staff to Education Secretary William Bennett in the Reagan administration and as Chief of Staff to Vice President Dan Quayle in the George H.W. Bush administration. But despite his solid conservative credentials, nowadays you are likely to find him on Twitter tweeting things like, "So, both leading Republican presidential candidates basically are ready to sell out Ukraine? Ugh." And quote tweeting anti-fascism scholar Ruth Ben-Ghiat with, "That's why if we want to save American democracy, we must take on Fox as well as the GOP, starting with calling it out for what it is, a disinformation machine designed to destroy trust in democratic institutions." If anyone had told me 10 years ago that Bill Kristol would be tweeting smack about the 2 leading Republican presidential candidates and the leading Republican cable network, I would have been very skeptical. But sometimes I read Bill's Twitter and I think to myself, that guy's woke, which of course I mean as a compliment. While he might not go that far, we're glad he's with us tonight to represent the Never Trump part of the pro-democracy coalition. Simon Rosenberg has become an ambassador of optimism, or borrowing from his new Substack, Hopium. Many of us in Markers and Downtown Nasty Women started following Simon on Twitter last spring or summer and relished his optimistic and data-filled tweets. And a shout out to another Marker co-founder, Amy Schiff, who I believe was the first person to come onto a Zoom and say, "You should follow Simon Rosenberg on Twitter." As many of you know, Simon was one of the few voices who correctly saw the dynamics leading up to the midterms. While reporters and pundits on TV and in the pages of the New York Times warned of a red wave and waning intensity on the issue of reproductive freedom in the months following the Dobbs decision, Simon was a lonely voice saying that the data didn't support those conclusions and that Democratic energy around Dobbs was high through the summer and fall. In the closing weeks of the campaign, when polls seemed to show that the races were tightening and leaning toward Republicans, Simon called out the junk polls with which Republicans were flooding the zone and urged those of us in the grassroots who were doing the get out the vote work to stay strong, focused, and not to fall for those junk polls and the negative sentiment that Republicans were pushing on and off social media. Simon is a political strategist and founder of New Democratic Network and the New Policy Institute. He's a veteran of 2 presidential campaigns, including a senior role in the 1992 Clinton War Room. You can subscribe to his YouTube channel and sign up for his brand new and aptly named Substack, Hopium Chronicles, with links in the link tree created for this event. And we will put that link in the chat. I just want to say that our groups are so grateful to Simon for his optimism and his reminder to stay loud, speak and tweet in declarative sentences, become information warriors, and not to succumb to manufactured negativity. Finally, our moderator, Robert Hubble, through his newsletter, Today's Edition, has been our daily voice of optimism and calm for several years. Many of you know the origin story that Robert started his newsletter soon after the 2016 election as a letter to reassure his daughters, who were, like many of our children, distraught at the outcome. At the beginning and for several years, Robert was a practicing attorney, and I always marveled at his ability to get the newsletter out every night after a full day of lawyering. Now he is a retired lawyer, and what started as a letter to his daughters is a Substack with over 35,000 subscribers and many more opens. Robert distills the news for his readers with a lawyerly point of view, a knowledge of the trials that we have faced and survived as a country, and a strong dose of hope. Have you read Hubble? Is a question that many of us share by text message in the mornings. Longtime readers have met Robert's managing editor, his wife Jill, either on Zooms or through his newsletter. We've heard about their daughters and grandchildren and recently took a virtual trip to Alaska with them. I told him this morning that he feels like family. And if you read the comments section on his daily Substack, you will see that his readers think of Robert as a trusted advisor and friend. With his optimism, love for democracy, and broad readership that includes some of Bill Kristol's colleagues at the Bulwark, we thought that Robert would be the ideal person to moderate this evening's conversation. With that, welcome Bill, Simon, and Robert.
Thank you, Ellen. I think I'm supposed to take it away from here. Let me just introduce myself. I'm Robert Hubble. Thank you to everyone who has joined us, although the little dialogue box has disappeared. The last time I checked, it was approaching 400. Today, getting 400 people together at the end of a workday to talk about democracy is both a remarkable thing and a positive sign that each of us should take away from this evening, if nothing more. Imagine back to 2015 and ask yourself if we could have gotten 400 people together to talk about a pro-democracy topic. And before we start, let me just say to Bill and Simon, thank you both for what you do. I am a subscriber to the Bulwark at whatever the highest level is. I think it might be founding member or something like that. And I don't think a day goes by where I do not quote or refer to some author in the Bulwark. And some of the authors write to me frequently, and I think we share much common ground. And you know, frankly, they take me to task on some of my views, which speaks to their place in the universe, which is a very good one at this point and a healthy one at this point in time in our democracy. And Simon, I have just really come to know Simon through his new Substack, Hopium. And I was impressed by his opening message because it was grounded in hope and optimism about the future, which is my view of the future, which brings us to the topic of today's moderated discussion, which is the rise of a pro-democracy coalition. And actually, the framing of this topic was Bill's. It was a little more contingent when it was first proposed. And Bill said, no, we should, there's no doubt about it. There is a pro-democracy coalition, and we should acknowledge that fact. in the topic that we're going to be discussing tonight. So let's start with the proposition that a pro-democracy coalition exists, and I think it does. I think 2022 proves that at the very least. And let me begin by asking Bill and Simon, what are the principles of that pro-democracy coalition? Bill?
Well, thanks, Robert. Thank you all for hosting this, and thank you all for being on this. And it's good to see Simon again on the screen. Occasionally I get to see him in person, which is even more exciting as he's mobbed at some DC restaurant by all of his admirers. You know, I sit there just reaching for the check as he gets distracted by all of his fans. I mean, the principles I think are basically is democracy, isn't that, liberal democracy, both at home and abroad, actually. I think at home is the center, of course, once Trump was a candidate and then elected, but abroad now with Ukraine. And they do dovetail pretty well. The people who are the strongest supporters of democracy at home tend to be the ones who understand the importance of what's happening in Europe, which I think is fundamental. And we could go through there are many elements of liberal democracy, rule of law, respecting elections. There are elements that Donald Trump and his supporters and his allies pretty systematically either just flouted or, ignored when useful, or at least undercut, So I do think it's a pretty coherent coalition. It's as many things happen in politics. I'd say people always want to say, well, you have to be positive. You have to have a positive agenda. You can't just be against someone. And that's absolutely true. But it's also true that usually at the beginning, it can be against something or some movement that's very dangerous, right? I mean, the New Deal had a positive agenda, but Roosevelt came to power because of the Great Depression and the failure of the preceding political and economic order. And that was an important thing to react against. And I guess I wouldn't, walk away from the fact that we came together to oppose Trump as an unusual threat, really a serious threat to our liberal democratic order. Some of us thought it was a big threat from the beginning. People, oh no, they won't be that big a threat. He won't win. Oh no, if he wins, he'll be a normal president. Oh, maybe he's a little erratic. He tweets and stuff, but come on, he wasn't going to do anything. He says he won't respect the election results, but of course he will. I mean, over and over and over. And he's unleashed a lot of things that are going to be hard to put back, so to speak, in the bottle. And so the threat goes on. I mean, he personally goes on, so that's a problem. But Trumpism goes on. And in fact, it's taken over, dominates one of our two major parties, which is a very dangerous situation. So there's a lot of work for us to do over the next, I'm afraid, I wish we could just do the work for the next, 18 months and say, okay, done, no problem. But I think this is an ongoing project. And hopefully, finally, I'll say, it's a project that both saves our democracy, but also strengthens it. Because a lot of us who've been maybe a little complacent about certain parts of it now realize there were real weaknesses, policy weaknesses, but also electoral, democratic weaknesses, as it were. And those need to be addressed as well. So maybe something good ultimately comes out of this. But honestly, the main thing now is averting still a very great threat, I think, at home. From Trump and Trumpism, and not the only threat we have to deal with, but I think a very fundamental one.
Well, so that's a great place to start, and let me take that and throw a tough question to Simon then. Taking out the criticisms of Trump, might not someone who is, who views themselves in the MAGA wing of the Republican Party say, oh yeah, I agree with everything Bill just said. We all agree on that. There isn't, we're all on the same page. Do you, Simon, see any difference between this pro-democracy coalition that is emerging from 2016, 18, 20, and what someone on the right might say, oh yeah, I'm a patriot. I believe in America and democracy?
It's a great question, and I wanted to start by saying thanks to Susan and Ellen and Amy and Kim and Lisa, and I think another Susan, right, for putting this all together. See the two of you, it's just an honor to be here, and thanks to all the folks that came tonight. I mean, as many of you heard me say, what sustained me during the battle against the red wave in this last election was the events like this that I did with all of you that showed me every week that there were proud patriots ready to go fight for their country. And the energy that I found in the grassroots of the Democratic Party was really inspiring to me, and it continues to be deeply inspiring in my work. So, you're the fuel in my tank, so to speak. So thanks, everybody. Look, I think I want to just build on something that Bill said, and I just think it's really important to establish sort of a baseline about what happened in 2022, and for us to go, Robert, to go into the future, right? Is that, our argument is that there were two elections in 2022. There was a bluer election inside the battleground, where because of our muscular grassroots, our candidates dramatically outraised the Republican candidates, and where we saw, high performance in the early vote and in turning out our voters, including young people. And, we actually did better in Arizona, Colorado, Georgia, Michigan, Minnesota, New Hampshire, and Pennsylvania than we did in 2020. An extraordinary achievement. And it was because there was a material threat. I mean, I think we were able to control the information environment much better because of these huge campaigns that we now have because of all of you. But there was also a clear material threat. And we know from some polling that many voters voted against Republicans because of abortion or democracy. Democracy was on the ballot. In the Secretary of State races, it was in everybody's face. And we saw amazingly, right, was almost every one of these anti-democracy candidates lost in the battleground. It is actually incredible, right, how well we did in these places. But the admonition to us is that outside the battleground, where we didn't have these muscular campaigns, where we weren't able to control the information environment, we fell back. And this is part of Bill's, general sort of counsel, that it was a really good election for us, but it wasn't good enough. And, that we still have the material threat of MAGA that's in front of us. But I want to say that I think Bill and Liz Cheney and this never MAGA wing of the Republican Party, or whatever it's called, deserves an incredible amount of credit for what they did last election, because they created a permission structure for like-minded Republicans or former Republicans all across the country to break from Republicans on the ground. We saw huge coalitions emerge in Michigan, Nevada, Arizona, Texas, where you saw publicly elected Republican officials breaking in groups, right, away from the Republican candidate. And this, to me, was one of the most undercovered and important things that happened in this last election. And some of these groups grew bigger and bigger, right? More and more people kept endorsing as the election went on, because they saw the water was warm, right? I'm not all by myself. And so I think we do have a lot to build on going into 2024. And part of the reason I'm really glad to be here is that I think if we were in a parliamentary democracy, Liz Cheney would be in our cabinet, Bill would be working in the White House, we'd absorb, there would be an absorption of the never MAGA non-right-wing party into our coalition in the way that you can do in a parliamentary democracy. We can't do that in our system as easily. And we need to continue to explore events like this and these conversations to let Bill and Liz and everyone who've been proud patriots and shown enormous courage and bravery, that we value them and we're grateful for their courage they've demonstrated. And we want them to stay as part of our family and find ways through it. And I talked to a lot of, Democrats, elected officials, about making sure that they're setting up dinners for those Republicans that went for Whitmer in Michigan. They should be honoring them and thanking them and keeping them in the game. So, Robert, I think one of the things is we just have to think differently now about how we approach our politics. And we have to, use our imagination. We have to figure out how to get up, as I've been calling it, get to 55%, and really, break the back of MAGA in this next election to loosen its grip on its dark grip on the Republican Party. And I think it's one of the keys of that is making sure that the never MAGA movement continues to grow. It gets stronger and bigger, more permission structure, and that we have a role in that, to make all of us have a role in that, to make them feel welcome in our family and to honor them as we move forward. So I don't know that I answered your question, but
I think you did. And what I want to do is I want to use this as a transition back to Bill about who the constituent members of the pro-democracy coalition are. But it looked like you wanted to comment on one or two things that Simon said. So take that as a transition to your next set of comments.
Well, as always, Simon has lots of interesting points and suggestive ones. I guess I just want to caution, I don't know if it's a caution, one can plan these things. Simon and I both planned different things and tried to make them happen. We certainly spent a lot of money trying to defeat the election deniers in 2022. We, Sarah Longwell, and I and our allies in our group, Defending Democracy Together, Republican Accountability Project. And I think that worked pretty well. We didn't do, Republicans still won the House. They didn't do as much as they might have done, which is good. We were right in our analysis of the polls, I think, pretty much, but still, it's not like we're out of the woods. I mean, everyone made fun of Kevin McCarthy for a long time, that he's Speaker of the House. And Trump, of course, faltered some, but Trump or DeSantis, most likely a Republican nominee, and neither is a strong advocate, strongly committed to democratic procedures and norms and the rule of law and due process. And now it turns out they're both, one is pro-Putin and one is kind of anti-Putin, and that's very bad, I think. So I think the combination of, we did what we had to do, I think, in 2020 and 2022 and 2018 to some degree even, and that's great. And the Democrats have been fine. I have no problem with being, an ex-Republican. Democrats have been perfectly pleasant and all that. So I thank Simon for helping ensure that. But I do think fresh thinking will be needed. And I think one thing one learns if you look at history about these situations is we don't know. We're in the early. We don't know kind of what the party structure might look like 3 years from now. We don't know who the leaders might be. We don't know whether some Republican will be in the next Democrat, prominently in the next Democratic ex-Republican, maybe in the next Democratic cabinet. The Democratic Party's changed somewhat under the pressure of the last 4 or 5 years. I think an awful lot of the young leaders of the party that we might talk about, let's put aside Biden for a minute, and so talk next generation. I don't know who was Josh Shapiro, who was Gretchen Whitmer, who was Abigail Spanberger, who were a lot of these people. Now there are also people further to the left, I think, who I respect, but not quite where I am, AFC and stuff. But there's a lot going on in the Democratic Party, which is an undercovered story, I'd say, compared to the Republican Party, and I think a hopeful story. I mean, I just met many more Democrats in the last 5-6 years than I probably had in the preceding 15. And I knew some of the Clinton Democrats, but after that, it sort of drifted away. Everything got more partisan. And there are a lot of them very impressive. I mean, this is just actually truly. But I think your question earlier, I think one last point on Robert on that very good question about, why wouldn't a MAGA person sign on? A MAGA person, of course, could nominally sign on to everything I said, or probably to what Simon says, except, nominally could sign on. But you have to oppose the anti-democrats. You have to oppose the authoritarians. If you step aside and say nothing, maybe later on you could be part of the coalition when you finally do oppose them. A lot of people have gone through that, right? And people like me say, I wish it'd been there earlier, but we're not turning away converts or allies at this point. But an awful lot of people have just gone along. A lot of people have become cheerleaders. A lot of people have acquiesced in pretty bad ways, and we don't know that. And that's not enough. So it's not being Donald Trump does not save you from being a part of the problem if you are enabling, acquiescing, refusing to stand up. If you're in a position of authority and refusing to stand up, or position of influence as a journalist or as a Wall Street Journal editorial page writer or something, and not standing up to Donald Trump or to Trumpism, that's bad. Now, do people have to stand up in every way I would like? No. If someone wants to say, look, we can't pick every fight, we're going to go ahead along with some stuff we don't like, that's politics, I understand. But so everyone's lines will be a little different, you know what I mean? And everyone will decide who's acceptable and who's not. So we have to be sort of tolerant, I think, in terms of winning over new people. Sarah Longwell, designed all of our ads, the videos. I was a Republican, I voted for Trump, but I can't stand it. We can't have another term of Trump. Those were very effective videos. And of course, those created a permission structure because they weren't people like me yelling at these people. How could you be such an idiot ever supporting this guy? He's a horrible authoritarian and a crook to boot, that is a fraud. And I can't believe you went for that. That doesn't work so well compared to, look, I wanted him to do well. I voted for him. I don't really like the Democrats, frankly. I've had problems with them over the years, but we can't have a second. That was the most effective ad. And even in 2022, some of the good Democratic candidates picked up on, I think, kind of our strategy there and ran ads like that themselves. I mean, it's pretty, Josh Shapiro and others in Pennsylvania explicitly said, you don't have to be a lifelong Democrat. You don't have to agree with me on everything. Maybe you're going to vote for Republicans for some other offices. I don't know, maybe in some local race, there's a good Republican running for county auditor and you want to vote for him, fine. But this, you can't have Mastriano, right? So I think having a broad-minded perspective and putting first things first and then putting other things, in a sense, a little bit behind is important. But 55%, I love it when Simon says that. It's so important. I mean, the best solution would be to have two healthy political parties. And they could have 51-49 elections, and we wouldn't lose much sleep. But we don't have two healthy parties. We're not going to have two healthy parties by November 2024. It's very risky to try to just win every election by, a few tens of thousands of votes. I mean, you really need to build that coalition out further. It can't just be, let's hang on to every voter we dragged out in 2020 and we'll do it again. I think that's a bad way of thinking. There's a little bit too much defensiveness among people in trying to, so once you're the incumbent, it always happens, right? We just need to replicate what we did. Well, no, we really need to broaden the scope. And I think we have opportunities. Ukraine, for DeSantis to go where Trump is on Ukraine, I think that's politically a huge vulnerability. It should be. Do you want the next president to just give Putin a massive victory in Europe and in the world? I mean, just that question asked over and over again, I think could pry away a few more voters. But the attitude has to be, look, we think you made a mistake in voting for Trump in 2020, but we welcome you now.
So let me reflect some of the pushback that I get from my readers when I raise exactly the points that the two of you are making occasionally. And in today's comments, I talked about Simon's getting to 55% in winning margins in my newsletter last night. I referred to his column on Substack. And I got some pushback from readers, one of whom said something like, well, that'll happen when the Earth reverses rotation and there's daily, shuttle service to Alpha Centauri. And I think what people worry about is that sometimes we can get into our own echo chamber and we can talk about hope and optimism all we want. And the question is it achievable? Is it doing? What is the evidence? Where's the data? And so, Simon, let me turn it to you and say, why should someone who's diametrically opposed to the Democratic positions on the Second Amendment, reproductive liberty, the climate, all sorts of other issues, say, okay, this is important enough for me to switch my vote in a presidential election or a senatorial election? What's your view?
The theory behind this Get to 55 project, as Bill mentioned, is that we need to go on offense. We cannot accept this current situation where every 2 years we could lose our democracy if the ball bounces the wrong way, right? We already had that happen in 2016. We've learned that for all time. And so I was very involved. I want to give a couple statistics, Robert, if I can, because that's part of what I do, right? From 1944 to 2004, 60 years, the Democratic Party only broke 50.1% one time in 1964. We got 50.1 in 1960. We got 50.1 in 1976. Clinton got 43, 49. And so from 1990, but since 1992, when Clinton and the New Democrats set out to try to make the Democratic Party competitive in national elections again, after we had lost 5 out of the 6 preceding presidential elections, some by huge margins, which Bill knows very well, is that, since then, we've won more votes in 7 out of 8 national elections. It's the best popular vote run of an American political party in our history. I'm very proud because I think this is in some ways my life's work, that I helped create a politics that could, we achieved what the New Democrats tried to do, which is to make us competitive at a national election again. And from 1992 to 2004, we averaged 47% of the vote in those 4 elections. Since my organization and the work that I did 15 years ago to identify a changing demography in the country, where rising Hispanics and rising millennials created this new opportunity for us, since 2008, where we've run into this coalition, this new emerging coalition, we've averaged 51% of the vote in those 4 elections, 47 to 51. So 4-point jump. What I'm now talking about is the next 4-point jump. How do we go from 51 to 55? I did this before. I was deeply involved in the last time we sort of reimagined our coalition and built a new politics around a new electorate. I don't exactly know how to get to 55, but we need to try, and there needs to be a huge national conversation. And the initial ideas that I put out there are 4 initial groups we really have to look at, right? The Never Trumper, Never MAGA folks, going deeper into that. We have to go deep into young people. I mean, I have lots of data showing the opportunities with young people and the margins we're now getting with under 45-year-old voters. I think we can do better with Hispanics. We fell back a little bit, not too much. It was a little exaggerated but we can regain some of the ground that we lost with Hispanics. And also, I think the politics of abortion are still, we haven't yet totally come to understand. I mean, the stories of Kansas and Michigan indicate that there's enormous power here. And I think DeSantis, if he is the nominee running on essentially a national abortion ban, which is what a 6-week ban is, has really, like this Ukraine thing, has really put himself in a very dangerous place, given how important abortion was to this last election. So those are just some ideas that I think we have to work on and noodle around. I think this is doable. And I'll give you just a couple stats, right? From this last election, in this terrible red wave, midterm, low Biden approval, high inflation, we got to 59% in Colorado, 57% in Pennsylvania, 55% in Michigan, 54% in New Hampshire, 52% in New Mexico, 51 in Georgia, 51.5 in Arizona, 51 in Wisconsin, 49 in Nevada. We already got to 55 in a lot of these states. And so, you know, we can do this, but it's one of these things, it's a man on the moon kind of thing, right? Like, I don't exactly know how we're going to get there, but we got to go get there. And we got to go get there to save our democracy, to ensure that freedom and democracy prevail. And Democrats have got to do what Bill said, was that we've got to reimagine, we've got to be creative, we've got to look anew at these things, like me sitting here with Bill, right? And you, Robert, and what we're doing here tonight. And so I'm really optimistic that we have time. And if I could do one thing, if I could wave one wand, I would have the National Democratic Party launch, and all of you should become advocates for this, a national voter registration campaign with young people starting in May. We need to put tens of millions of dollars behind this. If we can get young people, under 45-year-old voters, just to vote at their population distribution, not something that's like insane, right? But just at their population, we can gain 6 points nationally alone for that one thing, up from +4 to +10. The way we get to 55. So I've laid out in my memo that all of you, I hope you read, a clear way to do this. I'm not saying we can do it, but man, we've got to leave it all on the playing field and make sure we try as hard as we can in order to break the back of MAGA. And as Bill said, because the only way the Republicans are going to abandon MAGA is if they really decide it's a stone cold loser and they got to go into a new politics. We thought that was going to happen after 2021. It didn't. We hoped it would happen after 2022. It's gotten worse, right? DeSantis is a dangerous manifestation of this virus, the MAGA virus, right? And he seems so unhinged and so wild and crazy that it isn't just Trump. It's now become so much deeper and stronger and powerful. So we have a lot of work to do. And I think that Democrats need to, it's incumbent upon us not to play politics as usual here, not to play it safe. Joe Biden went big on his legislative agenda in 21, 22. He's got to go big in politics in 23, 24, in my view.
Okay.
Just one
So let's
footnote, Robert, if I could, I mean, you mentioned in passing there we have Republicans and Democrats, because of the past 20 years, particularly a polarization, have diametrically opposed views on many issues, and some of them really are opposed, but they're not maybe as opposed as they look on the surface. I mean, is every Republican an absolutist on no abortions? Is every Republican and no limitations on guns at all? Is every Democrat, I don't know, 70% taxes on the wealthy and Green New Deal tomorrow, and no carbon emissions ever again, and so forth? I mean, I think in practice, and Biden's done a pretty good job of this. I think there are plenty of overlap, and there's plenty of things where a lot of it is frankly problem solving and pretty sort of almost technical, like what policies actually work in helping people be healthy. If we can get back to something more like that kind of politics. But that's another thing to do. I think it'd be, I think Biden's been smart in just having some Republican co-sponsors for some of these bills. Maybe he doesn't get all the Republicans or most of them, but it still helps a lot. It still gives, again, a permission structure for people. I think we need to do that a little more resolutely on some of these other issues. But I think when you really step back and look at these issues, I don't know how many of them are, maybe, some part of the MAGA coalition certainly isn't going to buy off on them. And I suppose there are parts of the Democratic Party that have some non-negotiable demands. Of course there are, I guess, but an awful lot of stuff is not fairly doable, I would say, by a center/center-left coalition, predominantly with some center-right and some left. But I think that's really a doable thing. That's FDR, really, and that is how you get to 55 or 60.
Robert, can I
Well,
ask just one
I'm
thing?
sorry, you answered the question that I was going to ask. So let me say what the question was, and then maybe you can wrap it up with a bow. And that was, if you were in charge of the Democratic Party, Bill, and you were given a task of rebranding the party to advance this pro-democracy coalition, what would the message be?
I mean, I will defer to Simon on this. I mean, I'm not sure. I'm a little surprised. I've got to say now that I'm sort of an ex-Republican, I look at the Democrats, I think they're mostly kind of okay, and I don't have huge problems with them on most issues. Most I care a lot about foreign policy, and they become much more Hubert Humphrey Democrats, let's say, than, George McGovern Democrats. Not that George McGovern was a perfectly decent person and all that, and he's probably right about Vietnam, but I mean, or Clinton Democrats, as opposed to whatever the left wing would have been at the time. And that's true on a bunch of other issues. So I'm not sure that I'm not sure what I'm due. I am struck, and this is just a fact. I don't think it's fair even. I was talking with someone, I shouldn't say who, but a Democrat who ran for office, going to run again, who from a swingish state, not from deepest red in America, but who said the Democratic brand is bad. I said, really? Even where you are? And I mean, this is a state with a reasonable Democratic governor. Yes, because so many people are willing to believe the worst. Fox does a very good job of making some statement, as Carville put it on a conversation I had with him, conversations with Bill Kristol, that little show I had. He said, the Republicans do a great job of making one Amherst professor somewhere or 40 Stanford law students, let's take a current example, behaving badly, and they were behaving badly, and then they were rebuked as they should have been, and maybe they should have been rebuked in more real time, and that one dean shouldn't have been quite so accommodating of them. But that's like Joe Biden's fault, or it's the Democratic, governor's fault. It's not. I mean, they don't control what happens, among 24-year-olds at Stanford. But the Democrats seem to manage to. The Republicans do a very good job of heaping everything that middle Americans, let's just say, don't like about certain left-wing aspects of the universities and the schools and other institutions, and just heap that on the Democrats. And they seem to do it with a sort of amazing success. I don't quite know it. I don't know. I mean, I honestly, I've of course tried to push back against it and all that, but I'm a little spooked by how successful they are at that. And of course, there's part of the success is because there are Democrats occasionally play into their hands. But to be fair, the Biden administration has been pretty resolute in not seeming kooky, I think. And still, I run into people I would have considered 5 years ago kind of normal-ish Republicans and conservatives who honestly believe the Biden administration wants like extreme socialism and really believe that SVB, misunderstanding how interest rates work is because they are woke, because they have 3 sentences on their website that are pretty standard, frankly, sentences about we respect DEI and we're proud of the diversity of our board. And basically the whole place is a Silicon Valley bro outfit. You know what I mean? I doubt if it's very woke. Actually, it was very woke while it existed as an actual institution. But whether it was or not, it had zero to do with anything. You know what I mean? Right. And the idea that they think they can get away with saying that. And it was like it wasn't just like kooky, two kooky congressmen say. Ron DeSantis, the co-front runner for the Republican nomination for president, said Sunday morning, well, I mean, that's what happens when you run a bank. Right. It's full of DEI and ESG and woke initiatives. And it's like, what planet are we on? And how do you, it's not so easy, because it's so wacky and crazy and untethered from the truth, it's actually harder to push back on than if they were making some economic arguments that, Biden's policies are causing unemployment. And so, well, here are the unemployment rates. Simon does this all the time. Here are the unemployment rates under Biden. Here's what they were under, that you can answer. How do you answer the woke, SVB was a woke bank?
Right. Well, so then let me take this messaging issue and bring it back to Simon and combine it with the youth issue. You both have been effective communicators on Twitter and other platforms. Democrats beat themselves up about their poor messaging, and there's some truth to that. They've been caught flat-footed from time to time. But Simon, what would you do? What's the message to the younger voters, to the 4 million high schoolers who become eligible to vote each year? And actually, I think it's 12 million between each presidential election. How do we reach them? And I just want to mention the organization, the Civic Center. If you're not familiar with that, it's run by Laura Brill. Some people in the comments have mentioned it. It has an incredible game plan for reaching out and registering high school students. But Simon, how do we reach them? What is the message given, and this is, it's not a criticism that I'm going to make.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of Joe Biden and the senior Democratic leadership. But how do we make it relevant to the younger voters when our next president, hopefully, will be our oldest?
So I'm going to give perhaps an answer full of hopium, of one perhaps irrationally optimistic, which is that, I'm a Clinton guy. I grew up under Bill Clinton, and there was one Bill Clinton message, right? We had one argument, and yeah, we shaved it a little bit here and there for various groups, but at the end of the day, he had a single argument he was making to the American people. And I do think that where things are going now is that we have to establish this, we have to ground our politics, as Bill was saying, in this threat to democracy. We have to do better in winning the economic argument. The economy is going to be number one, number two. And if you look at polling of young voters, many were heavily impacted by COVID, and their economic lives were in tatters. And three is climate change, right, for young people. But I think that, part of the reason I've closed my organization that I've been running for 27 years, and is that I think we're entering a new age of politics, the post-Cold War era. I mean, it's incredible that we don't actually have a name for the last era. It was the post-Cold War era, and now we're in the post-Cold War era. And I think that, for me, the defining battles that we're going to be in for the next 20 years is that we have to ensure that democracy prevails over autocracy. We have to ensure that the planet doesn't warm. We have to ensure that that we continue to lead the world and create rising wages for our workers. These are the things we have to do. I mean, there's a lot of other things we can do. These are the things we have to do. And I think that for young people, I think the thing I just laid out is something that's applicable to everybody. And then you can, tailor it to each group and so on, who may have particular concerns. But if we can't, where I will be a little bit critical of Biden is that I think what they decided to do at the State of the Union was just give sort of a relentlessly positive message about the economy, which is something I've been arguing for, so I can't be critical. But I don't think he created the framework around the democracy autocracy structure as well as he needed to, or around abortion either, by the way. Those two issues, as Bill said earlier, we know what motivated people to go vote, to raise the money, to turn out in these battlegrounds, right, is that they were scared. The reason many people are here tonight is that you are scared for your democracy. You're worried about your country, and you desperately want to see leaders going and fighting to preserve it, the world that we were given. And I think that the motivating, the sort of the engine right now for us, or the fuel, or whatever you want to call it, is deeply involved in protecting democracy and also freedom around abortion. And I think this is new stuff for us, right? This is new language, new arguments, and we have to but we've got to go forward into this. And so I'm very optimistic, Robert, that we have a formula. Part of what I say all the time is I'd rather be us than them heading into 2024. Some of you heard me say that last cycle too, but the same conditions apply, right? Joe Biden's been a good president. Things are better. They're still a little bit too crazy, right? And, DeSantis has made a clear choice. It is shocking. Somebody who's I've been involved in presidential elections going all the way back to the 1980s. What Ron DeSantis is doing in his positioning, if you looked at that Florida polling that came out last week, the 6-week abortion ban is polling at 22% in Florida. The concealed carry, the ending concealed carry, or permitless
Constitutional carry.
Yeah, 23%. He's living this Ukraine thing. He's living in places of the 20s and 30s. And as somebody who has helped create presidential campaigns, you don't want to go anywhere that's 20 and 30%. You want to live in the places that are in the 40s and 50s. And he's not going there on almost anything. And I think it means for us that we know that the likely opponent to us is going to be MAGA, right? We have to continue to say that Trump and DeSantis are the same. It's all MAGA, and that we're going to run. And I think Biden's going to run for re-election. We'll all be behind him. If he doesn't run, we'll also have essentially the same dynamic. The Democrats will be running on their accomplishments and defining them as being out of the mainstream. But I really do think that we The last thing I'll say is I was a lead strategist for the DCCC in 2018, and I helped design the strategy that helped flip the House. And there were enormous fights about how to deal with Trump. And what the pollsters were always saying is we got to talk about kitchen table issues, economy, healthcare. Can't talk about Trump. Can't talk about Russia. Can't talk about Helsinki. People don't care about that. And I was in a minority on that, and we ended up winning. So it's possible I was completely wrong. But January 6th changed all that in the Democratic Party. And, and we now, I think you're seeing, and I want to give a lot of credit to Hakeem Jeffries for creating, I think, rhetorical space for the Democrats in the House now, far more muscular language, far more engaged in taking on the sort of the radicalness of the Republicans. And so I just want to say, on balance, I feel really good about where we are. Like you can see a path, right? There's a path forward for us. There's going to be rocks and bumps and we're going to have issues, right? But it is much more likely that we win in 2024 than they do. It's much more likely that the House flips back to us in 2024 than they keep it. The Senate's going to be really hard, right? There's no question that the ability for us to keep Ohio and West Virginia and Montana, those are going to be crapshoots, right? And if Manchin doesn't run, whatever Manchin is, right, we may not keep West Virginia. And so I think that I just want to go back to everyone in this room and say, look, we've done a lot of good, everybody. We kicked ass in 2022. It was an amazing achievement. And we should feel really good about where we are now. But we also understand the pressure on us to get the work done. Again, that's why we're here. It's friggin' March. You guys are already meeting like crazy, right? All these groups that I spoke to last cycle are all like working hard already. It's awesome to see. And so I feel what is our secret weapon that we have is all of you, all the groups that have sprung up during COVID and these Zoom-based groups that have created a lower barrier to entry for people to get connected to politics. It's exploded our grassroots. It's muscular and strong. We're raising crazy amounts of money. We're writing millions of postcards, right? Texting, all these things. This is awesome. I mean, Bill, for all the work that you've done, you're seeing this de Tocquevillian kind of explosion of citizen activism around the country. And it's what you said in the very beginning. It's making our democracy stronger, but we still have so much work to do.
Just 2 footnotes, Robert and Simon, that was very eloquent and I think really true. 2018, you were right. I mean, I live in a district that flipped in 2018 in Northern Virginia. It went from Barbara Comstock to Jennifer Wexton. People didn't decide suddenly that they didn't like Barbara Comstock. They liked Barbara Comstock. She was a pretty anti-Trump Republican, so it wasn't even like she was not a MAGA lunatic or anything, but she was a vote for Republican control of the House, for continued Republican control of the House. And Jennifer Wexton was a vote to put Nancy Pelosi in charge of the House to check Trump. That was it. Now they screwed up healthcare and of course McCain's vote. And all, there were particular kitchen table issues that were a little more effective as embodying, you might say, the difference. But ultimately, I talked to a lot of Democratic members of Congress in 2019, nice people, and they were sort of like they believed their own rhetoric. We won because of healthcare. It's like, with all due respect, my neighbors in McLean did not change their views on healthcare overnight. They're not. 98% of them are not using Obamacare. They're a pretty well-off community. That was true of a lot of the places that flipped. I don't mean to minimize Obamacare or offend anyone or anything. A lot of them benefited from the tax cut that Trump and the Republican Congress passed. And they did not want Trump to have a Republican Congress to do his bidding. Right. That was the main issue. And I mean, it's members of Congress are very bad judges because they want to believe that it was their brilliant, speeches on this or that to change things, and that they weren't put there because to block Trump. Now, that was an off-year election. It's a different story from 2022. But I just want to say Simon was more right than wrong about that. I just don't buy that argument. And then when abortion kicked in, and same thing in 2022. People wanted to make sure there wouldn't be a Republican, that Biden would have support in blocking what they viewed as radical pro-life measures. Second point, super quick. I mean, you asked sort of what would I tell the Democrats to do? I don't know. They should study Michigan really carefully. Michigan, let's just leave aside Pennsylvania where Shapiro won by 15, but Mastriano was such a wacky candidate. Maybe you can't learn too much from that. The Republican nominee in Michigan and the Republican slate in Michigan was not particularly obviously crazy, crazier than Trump, and Trump won Michigan in 2016. He lost it by a point and a half in 2020. Whitmer wins by 10 points. They carry every constitutional office, and they win both houses of the state legislature by big majorities. Someone needs to really look at now abortion was on the ballot. I think literally, maybe it wasn't a constitutional amendment or something, referendum, but which was smart of the Democrats. But what did they campaign on? What did they not campaign on? Whitmer was an incumbent. She wasn't like, it was easier in a way for Shapiro, although I respect him a lot. But, he's a new person. He could say, I'm going to do this and that. Whitmer had a rough 4 years. I mean, she's good 4 years, but she had to manage COVID. There were problems. She didn't make every decision perfectly, I'm sure. And yet she won easily. And as I said, they won everything. That was a swing. That is a swing state. And as I say, a state Trump won. Someone really needs to study what happened. And maybe Simon, maybe people, and Robert, maybe you know more about this than I do. Maybe people are studying it, but Michigan is the one place I would really go look at.
Yeah,
that's very good advice. And I'm going to try to jump in here. We have people asking comments like crazy in the chat room. One thing that keeps coming up, and I'm going to turn this to you, Simon, are from people who live in red states, Florida, Texas. I hear from readers in the Deep South who are afraid to even admit to their neighbors that they're Democrats. What is your message to them? We've been talking about essentially the 2024 presidential election, but all politics is local.
Yeah.
Simon?
Listen, I have this presentation called "With Democrats, Things Get Better," which I encourage. It's on my new Substack. I'm still getting used to saying that. It's a week old, by the way. It's 6 days into my Substack. It's been a lot of fun already. It's a great platform, and I've enjoyed it actually a lot. I love the engagement with people on it. But I have this presentation called "With Democrats, Things Get Better," where I go back to the end of the Cold War in 1989, and I show that over this period of time that Democrats, when we've been in power, we've made the economy's grown and deficits come down, and there's been American progress. And when Republicans have been in power, there's been recessions and spiraling deficits and American decline. I'm sorry, Bill, in my language. And I think establishing this basic idea that when we've been in power, we've done a good job is a universal thing that has to happen everywhere, because it's true, right? It's just a fundamental truth of our life that we've had 3 constructive, positive Democratic presidents in a row, and the Republicans have not. And I think that it gets very hard. There's no magic, there's no silver bullet here for red states, right? There's going to be some of these states are just going to be difficult for a long time. But I think one of the things that gets very easy to push us around and to define us negatively is because there isn't the positive case is not defined. I mean, the whole thing about communications, and I was in the war room in 92, it's not about responding, right? It's not about, it's not about countering disinformation. It's about, you have to go on offense and fill the space and tell your story so it's harder for others to blow you around. And, that absence of that storytelling is what creates the power of Fox News, and it creates the power of OAN and all these other right-wing organizations. Is that, and it's why, part of my story, Robert, is that this idea of getting louder. The reason I'm here, I'm doing events like this. I'm doing 2 this week. I'm doing some weeks in April, I'm doing 3 events like this, because I want to help all of us understand that we have agency here, that we can change our destiny, right? That we can get to 55. We have the power to do that. We have the power to end MAGA. We also have the power to get louder. And I've done a bunch of events with some of the organizations that I think are doing a phenomenal job. Bulwark is a critical part of this ecosystem. So is Courier Newsroom and Resolute Square and Midas Touch and Deep State Radio. There's a whole new emergent world of centrist and center-left media that is critical, because when you have a media organization, you have much freer conversations. If you live in a 501c3 or C4, you can't talk about politics, basically. It's kind of crazy, right? So it's great. But the other piece is that I want to challenge everyone here to help us reinvent the war room. The war room, in our mind's eye, is 20 sweaty kids drinking Red Bulls, producing videos, right? And fighting in the daily, exchange of media. We need to think of the war room now as 4 million proud patriots wired together, networked together, amplifying positive stories about this country. We have to respond to their negative sentiment that they're pumping into our poisoning our discourse every day with unrelenting positive sentiment as a structural response to what they're doing. I've really become convinced during my journey over the last 6 to 9 months, which has really changed me, frankly. I mean, my understanding of American politics is different today than it was a year ago. And one of my big takeaways is that Greater MAGA is a negative sentiment machine. They want us to feel bad about our country, about our democracy, about the American project, about our leaders, about our institutions, about each other. And we have to respond not only by being loud, but we have to be conscious and intentional about putting more positive sentiment into our discourse. Hopium, right? This has become a central organizing principle of this stage in my political career, where, and I started with Clinton. He was the man from hope, right? Like, it's interesting for me that I've ended back up where I began in many ways in politics, is that the power of optimism, the power of belief that tomorrow is going to be better than today. That's when we're at our best in the center left. Let them be the pessimists. Let them be when they talk down America, we have to talk it up. When they say that we can't create economies that work for everybody, we can show them what we've done. There is so much evidence and ammunition that this country is the most remarkable place in the world, that we've made enormous progress in the last 30 years. But people aren't going to know it unless we tell that story. And so some of this is on us. I think we've taken for granted a little bit that people understand things more than they do. You can't score unless you shoot. You can't expect somebody to understand, what you've done unless you tell them again and again and again and again. And I think repetition is a really, really critical part of this. As we go forward, we can't be scared of repetition, even though we sometimes feel like we're being insulting to people, right? I've been given the same friggin' presentation in some various forms since 2017. I've given it hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. I'm going to continue to give it hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times because there's a lot of people who haven't seen it. And so I think that if I could leave everyone here with one message, is that we have more power than we know. And we haven't been well organized. They've out-organized us. We can organize ourselves differently, be louder, counter the right-wing noise machine. The curtain's been pulled back on the Wizard of Fox, right? And we now know they are going to continue to pretend they're a national news organization. We don't have to go along with it, right? Like, we can talk about the fact that these guys are purposely lying and spreading disinformation into our daily conversation as a national strategy, right? Shame on them. We have to have, Bill, I think, one of these moments during McCarthyism, right? Have you no decency, sir? We're really at a place here with the Republicans. We're like, you gotta be shitting me that you're continuing doing all this stuff. And we've got to figure out how to get out of the sense that we're being overwhelmed by all this stuff and recognizing it's a strategy. We need a strategy to counter it, and we can beat it. And I think we're getting there, and I'm very optimistic about where we're going.
Bill, you want to comment on that, or I can ask you a really hard question? You're on mute.
There's noises in the hotel hallway here. They've subsided. Yeah, go ahead and ask your hard question, sir.
So who's worse, Donald Trump or Ron DeSantis?
I mean, DeSantis has gotten worse over the last 6 months, and I think I would have had a pretty easy time answering that 6 months ago. And I still think I have I think the right answer is Trump is more dangerous. Trump has been president for 4 years. He knows what he wants to do. And I mean, the very act of reelecting him would be such a signal of contempt for American norms and the rule of law and everything else that it would really put us in a super dangerous path. I think even if, they didn't have 60 votes in the Senate, or even if Democrats controlled one of the houses. I mean, I just think what he tried to do in those last 2, 3, 4 months is what he would do for 4 years. DeSantis would be bad, and as I say, is moving in the wrong direction, not the right. You could have written a scenario where after 2022, certainly after January 6th, 2021, someone like DeSantis kind of decides to be somewhere in between populist inflected Republican, but not, Trump craziness. DeSantis has really decided he's got to be in that next link to Trump. I think it leaves a little more room incidentally than people realize for some. I don't like any of these people. I want to hesitate. I want to say they've all been badly, enabling of and acquiescing to Trump, but it does leave room for Nikki Haley, Chris Christie, Mike Pence, Tim Scott type, I think, to be, look, I went along with Trump. I'm not like this crazy never Trumpers. I voted for him twice. He did a lot of good things, a little unfair attacks on him, but we can't have January 6th, and we got to be pro-Ukraine. I mean, I think someone running like that in the Republican primary would not win, but I don't know. Aren't 25% of Republican primary voters pro-Ukraine? Is it that, would it be, it would be good for the country, actually, if someone took that position. But I think I'm a little more freaked out about DeSantis than I was 6 months ago. The other thing is Trump is an effective Democrat, and we know that. We don't really know that DeSantis is. He got himself reelected comfortably in Florida, but that's not the same as on the national stage. And I personally think, and I'm very curious what, Simon, you think about this. I mean, there's some evidence that DeSantis, I mean, he's kind of a check the box demagogue, and they told him DEI, that's really a great thing to scream and yell about, and wokeness, and Florida's where woke goes to die. I mean, really, are we being serious here? And does that mean that, like, if you are much more woke than I am, you don't get to live in Florida? You don't get to teach in Florida? You don't get to work in Florida? Is that, I mean, the totalitarianism, if I can really say it, of that message is itself astonishing. No liberal governor, I mean, once Cuomo said something stupid about how if you're pro-life, you're not welcome in New York or something, and he got beat up by everyone, including many Democrats, and I think he sort of retracted it. He didn't really mean it. I don't know what he meant exactly, but this is like DeSantis' theme. It's not a random comment on a one TV show, And so I think, so I am worried about DeSantis, but I think Trump is I think a little scarier, a little more dangerous. But I mean, it would be good if they could be weakened as much as possible in the primary process. And I am worried that we're not going to be saved from having to face one of them.
Simon, a number of the commenters in the chat have said, what do we do with this constant harping on the anti-woke message that's coming from Ron DeSantis and, frankly, most people in the MAGA world now? What's the response?
Well, it's so interesting is that to believe these kinds of attacks are going to work, it means that they have to be well calibrated. I mean, and we can almost always count on the Republicans for going too far and doing, as Bill was just talking about, sort of taking something that could be a germ of something that was powerful and then, losing control of it because of their extremism and just their sort of red meat kind of politics. Navigator had I on my Twitter thread this week, I did a series of threads about DeSantis and I got like 4 million views. It was crazy. Because I talked about polling now that we're starting to see, this Florida polling showing that even Floridians are kind of horrified by the new DeSantis, the new more MAGA than ever DeSantis, right? Who's gone, 15-week abortion ban wasn't enough. He had to do 6. He's removing elected officials from office. It's just an unbelievable thing. But there was a question in the national survey on Navigator where they asked people, what are the things that are most important for young people and students? And the number one thing was protecting them from gun violence at 54%. Protecting them from wokeism was at 31%. And so many of the things that DeSantis has settled on are these things that may poll, 60, 70% in the Republican base, but poll like at 0, right, among independent voters and Democrats, or at least in the 20s. And he's living in this. And that's why when I look at DeSantis, as somebody who's been in early stages of presidential campaigns, when decisions like this are made, right, about how to position the candidate, I'm astonished at what he's doing. And it's almost as if, he really has, I think my conclusion about what happened to DeSantis is that he thought a red wave was coming. And last fall and winter, they made a decision to move him further and deeper into this kind of red wavy kind of thinking, right? This anti-democratic woke stuff. And they put him in a place that's untenable for him. That is where he's sounding like a buffoon, like a cartoon character. I think he's got, and this is where Bill was saying, I would just want to agree with what Bill was saying, is that DeSantis has got performance issues. He's not a good politician. He's not good. He comes off as being kind of a dweeb, right? Like just kind of like an unimpressive guy. I mean, he doesn't sound authentic. I mean, and so I think that's where Trump, this is why, look, if I had to bet my money now, I think Trump beats him in the primary. And because I just don't think DeSantis has the political skills required to both defeat Trump and then pull his party back together on the other side, because that would take historic political skills. Anyone who had to do that it would be an extraordinary thing to try to pull off. I don't think he's got it. And I think one of the things we have to do is we can't give him power that he doesn't have, right? I am beating the crap out of him right now. What I'm really proud of is that David Frum just wrote a piece in the Atlantic that mimicked, I don't know if he quotes me, but it mimics a lot of the arguments that I'm making. Bill's been talking about it. We got to just start ridiculing this guy. The DNC's got to be putting out videos of his goofy outfits and all these other things, the way they do this stuff to us. He has got, man, I will tell you, I'm not scared of him. I am not. I know he did really well in Florida. We didn't have a great ticket, right? He only won by 1% in 2018, right? And I think he's made a huge error on Ukraine. This was a huge, huge, huge mistake, because now we can go to our voters and say, you scared, Trump was asked yesterday about a national abortion ban. He's like, I'm looking at it, right? Like he sort of equivocated and didn't just say, I'm not, I'm against it, right? The national abortion ban is at 15, 20%, right? And you want to go live at 15, 20% on an issue that's a voting issue for a huge percentage of the population. So we can take the abortion issue. We now know that Trump and DeSantis are a threat to our democracy. We know that Trump and DeSantis are a threat on abortion. Those two issues, which drove and motivated the election in 2022, we have that again that we're going to be able to use. And obviously, we're going to be in some different place in the fall of 2024. We can't predict. But again, forecasting, looking out, we should feel good about where we are. He has made a series, I think, of really self-destructive mistakes that took what could have been a promising candidacy and turned it into something where it's going to be much, much harder for him to win the general election next year.
Okay, thank you, Bill. I know you have another event bumping up against this, or that you had a time constraint here. So I want to invite you to make any final comments that you would like on any topic, but we are here talking about the Pro-Democracy Coalition. So I think it would be great if people could leave with a hopeful message to reinforce them for the fight to come.
Yeah, thanks, Robert. Thank you all for doing this, for coming and organizing, and Robert and Simon for the discussion, which is very thought-provoking for me. I mean, Simon and I talk a lot, but hearing him, explain it in a way, go back to first principles has actually been very useful. I'll just pick up on what Simon said. I mean, look, often in politics, things are kind of two trains are running down the tracks. You can hop on the train you prefer. You can try to put a little more weight on your train if you want to mix metaphors here, put a little more muscle on your side, But basically, politics is pretty, decided, cut and dried in terms of the basic structure of it. And that's fine. That's how the world works. That's what our lives are like a lot of the time, right? You go to work, it's kind of the same yesterday as it today as it is yesterday, and you hopefully do a little better job, and that's that. Sometimes things are just up in the air, unpredictable. There are no tracks. You're on a mixed 18 metaphors here. You're on some kind of, I don't know, Jeep in a desert. You don't know where things are going. You don't know who else is out there. And it's very unpredictable. Things can go very wrong and things can go right in very new ways. And I think we are in that kind of moment. I mean, if you look at American history, so there are these different cycles, you might say, and there are cycles of relative stability, where, of course, when you're in the middle of it, like Simon and I did, it's all exciting, and it's, I think this election is really important, and it's Bob Dole and Clinton and all this. But when you look back at it, you think, 3 8-term presidencies, pretty civilized. I mean, a lot of nasty politics, but most consensus on a lot of important issues too. And we pulled together to make it through the financial crisis and so forth. And now we're in a totally different world, I think. And it's very volatile and very unpredictable. But this is exciting in a way for people who want to get involved more in politics. I mean, in a way, it's hard to tell people you need to go out and do everything from postcards to local organizing to writing things, as you do, Robert, to thinking things through, to publicizing certain things, to making arguments, to try to change people's minds. Hard to tell people to do all that when it's all kind of chugging along the same path. And that's why turnout drops and so forth. There's a reason turnout went up so much in the last 3 elections. It's because, and it really is historic if you look at 2018 and then 2022, leaves like presidential even. And it's because so much is at stake and so much is unknown and uncertain. And a lot of it is the threat. The authoritarian threat is real. I mean, that I would come back to again. I really look at the rhetoric on the right, and not just from Trump, but even that's now been absorbed even by people I would have said 5-7 years ago. No, they're not that way, but they unthinkingly are that way. Now, would they really be as bad as Trump? No, obviously, but they've accepted so much of this illiberal rhetoric. So it's a scary time, but also a time of real opportunity because it's so fluid. And I think at a great time for us as young people all the time, I think it's going to get young people involved, which Simon is so concerned about. You can make a difference. We always say they can make a difference, but often they really don't make that much difference. Or they're number 42 and a list of big people doing things. That's fine. That's the way we all began that way. But it's not. You're not like if you weren't there, someone else would be there. That's not the way it is now. Who knows what the right message could be some places. Who knows if you ran for Congress as a 25-year-old, what kind of difference you could make? Who knows if you were a young advisor to some governor who wins a swing state, how much difference you could make to national politics. So I think it's really a moment to get involved and really, that's what democracy is about. I think people really can make a difference.
Terrific. Thank you, Simon. Any concluding thoughts?
First of all, just thanks to everybody, and Bill, thanks to you for your courage over these last few years. I still am in awe of what you and Liz Cheney and Bulwark do every day. It's just hard stuff, and I'm just grateful that you are staying in it and not going off and doing other things with your life, and you've stayed in the fight. And Robert, it's been great to get to know you in recent weeks. Yeah, listen, I mean, I sort of said my piece, but I'll end with this, right? I think last cycle, one of the reasons that I sort of put my head down and went out and hung out with all of you for 6 months was I was blown away by the negative sentiment that had come into our family and the sort of the loss of confidence in ourselves as a country, the loss of confidence in Biden, the kind of infighting that was going on, and just that we were down, right? Like we were down. BBB was a rough fight, and I think it really took something out of us in late 2021. And I just felt like we didn't have the luxury of being down. I mean, the stakes were too high. I mean, for after January 6th, if the Republicans had taken the House and Senate, I mean, my God, what a message that would have sent to the world, that you could lead an insurrection and be rewarded for it by the American people. And the Republicans were partially rewarded for it, but it was essentially a jump ball. I mean, election in the House. I mean, it could have easily gone the other way. And I think the Republicans know it, by the way. I mean, they're very weak. In some ways, the worst possible outcome for the Republican Party was a 5-seat majority in the House that was ungovernable, and where McCarthy looks like a eunuch who can't, manage his affairs. But I'll say this, is that I think the most important thing as we go forward is what I was saying earlier, is that Joe Biden has been a good president. The Democratic Party is strong. They're weak, we're strong, we're united, they're divided. I mean, all of this stuff, this negative stuff that's in our head, that's been put there by the right-wing noise machine, the attacks on the Democrats, we've got to slough it off. We're good. I'd rather be us than them. We got to live in this place of positive and glass half full, not half empty. As I kept saying during the election, if we end up spending the last few months of 2022 talking about all the things we didn't do as opposed to all the things that we did, we're going to get our asses kicked, and we'll deserve it, right, at that point. And so I do think that this issue about why Democrats are uncomfortable talking about all the good things that they've done is something we got to get over, right? Because frankly, the preservation of our democracy may count on it. Because we need to be able to tell people that government can work, that we have the ability to make things better, that everything isn't terrible and horrible, and all the pessimistic stuff that comes from the right. We can't out-pessimism them. We've got to respond to them, Robert, as you do every day, with optimism and not misplaced hope, but belief in ourselves and our capacity to make things better. And so I think we're on this journey together. We learned together last cycle that we don't have the luxury of being down. The American people are counting on us, right? The whole world is really counting on us. If the American democracy goes down, the global democratic movement will be in tatters. It's why she is going to Russia next week. We're going to have this major moment next week where China and Russia will be together. And so I just want to conclude by saying, we can do this, right? We already did it. I'd rather be us than them. We have the tools. We know what we got to do, right? We got to win the economic argument. We got to register every friggin' young person in the country in the next year and a half. We've got to stay on offense. We can't let them psych us out. And as I think Ellen said, I want to just repeat this for the people in this room, is that Democrats have to learn how to speak in declarative sentences. Joe Biden's a good president, period. Not but this, or the Democratic Party is strong, but what about this? Simon says we can get to 55. Here's the ways to do it. But Simon, what about all these other ways, right? The buts have to stop. We got to have declarative sentences. They just end, right? Like we can get to 55, period. Instead of internalizing all these negative attacks and this lack of confidence in ourselves that we put into our own discourse, we're doing their work for them when we do this. And in 1992, in the war room, right, part of the premise was, we had to make our case. They're going to attack us and then we respond. Don't attack yourself, right? Don't make their arguments for them. We have to get far more. This is like communications 101, which we lost sight of this last cycle. Ron Brownstein referred to me in that Atlantic piece as being a psychiatrist of the Democratic Party. I'll take it. I don't want to do that anymore, right? I want to go win this next election. We had our moment. We went through it, right? So I just want to say to all of you, thank you. I mean, how awesome is it that we have these tools, this ability to create this kind of community, that you're using these things you've built for so much good. Just thanks to all of you for doing this. I mean, it's really inspiring and it's great to be with everybody. And remember, I'd rather be us than them in every way possible.
Well, Simon and Bill, thank you for all you
Thanks.
do. And I want to say the thing that makes me most hopeful is that 6 co-sponsor organizations came together tonight, including Markers for Democracy, the Downtown Nasty Women's Group, and others, got 400 of us together to talk about what's right about America, what we have done right. As I frequently say in my newsletter, we have every reason to be hopeful, but no reason to be complacent. And with that, Kim or Lisa or Ellen, if you want to sign us off, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, Lisa Korn, one of the co-founders of Downtown Nasty Women Social Group. On behalf of all of our groups, Downtown Nasty Women, Markers for Democracy, Team Min, the Wednesday Group, Seniors Taking Action, and Mamaroneck Larchmont Indivisible, we thank you all for attending tonight. We thank you for caring about our democracy, caring about our elections, and for fighting against the threats to so many of the rights we've enjoyed or been fighting for decades. We've been working diligently for the last 6+ years to keep people engaged and reminding everyone we know that democracy is something we all must tend. It's not a given. In these times we've been living in, it can get overwhelming. It's very meaningful knowing that we're not alone, that the work we do together is making a change. Sometimes it feels like we're making minute changes or just fighting to hold on to what we have. And other times we know we're making bigger differences in our country. And we've learned that we can not stop this work. It's been amazing seeing 500+ participants on Zoom and YouTube tonight. We're really inspired, and certainly we are not alone. We had over 700 people RSVP, and for that, we want to thank our activist partners, Jessica Craven from Chop Wood Carry Water, Simon and Robert for amplifying our event tonight so we could amass this big group. Our groups are inspired by your work. We promote your work and your actions all the time. Many a time reading your words, hearing you speak has kept us going. And when we win, we savor the wins together. Thank you to our panelists, Bill Kristol, Simon Rosenberg, and our moderator, Robert Hubble. Thank you for leaving us with a positive note to inspire our work. We need more conversations like this. And you've heard from a few of us and from the chat how much we respect and admire your work. We've learned from you tonight, and we're privileged to do this work together with you. We look forward to continuing to build a pro-democracy coalition together and to getting our country on track and flourishing. Just want to tell everybody tonight, we put one link in the chat. You can click to see how to follow our guests and subscribe to their various sites and Substacks to follow their work and stay in touch. That link also takes you to information about each of our host groups. For each group, you'll find links to sign up for our newsletters that tell you about great speakers we host, actions you can take, postcarding campaigns we're working on, even how to amplify the great work Dems are doing, and more. Right now, if you want to help get out the vote cards for the important race in Wisconsin, you can find information on that too. And finally, you'll find links to donate to our giving circles where you can make a difference at the state level in Virginia and Michigan. So thank you for coming. We'll work together and sustain our democracy. Have a great night. Thank you so much.
Good night. Thank you.